Hello fellow seekers of wisdom and virtue. In the last episode of this series, we introduced the topic of Stoicism, where I gave a brief overview of its pioneers and talked about how it can be an asset in our everyday lives. I also touched on the 4 Stoic virtues, but continuing this series, I wish to dive deeper into these in order to give a clearer picture of what these virtues might entail. Today I want to talk to you about one of the most important virtues in Stoicism, courage. Now I know what you're thinking. Courage? That's just something superheroes and soldiers have, right? Wrong. Courage is not just about being physically brave, although that is an aspect of it. It's also about having the moral fortitude to do what's right, even when it's difficult or uncomfortable. The Stoics believed that courage is the foundation of all virtues. Well, some did. Xenophon argued that it was self-control that was the foundation of all virtue, which kind of makes more sense to me, but we can argue about that over a cup of tea. Without courage, we cannot live a virtuous life, because we will be too afraid to act in accordance with our values. But what does it mean to be courageous? It means facing our fears head on and doing what needs to be done, even if it is risky. Think about it. How many times have you held back from doing something because you were afraid of the consequences? Maybe you didn't speak up when you saw someone being mistreated, or you didn't pursue a career you were passionate about because you were afraid of failure. These are all prime examples of times where we lacked courage and let fear hold us back from living our best lives. But the Stoics knew that fear is a natural emotion and that we can learn to overcome it through the cultivation of courage. Courage is not the absence of fear, quite the opposite. It's the ability to act in spite of it. Now let me be clear. Courage is not about being reckless or foolish. It's about being wise and prudent, and having the courage to take calculated risks when necessary. To misquote Socrates here, daring when accompanied by intellect provides profit. Accompanied by folly leads to harm to oneself or others. Think about the risk-taking actions that land people in prison, or on the contrary, propel people on a path of business success. If you want to start your own business, it takes courage to take that leap of faith, but it also requires careful planning and preparation. The person who finds a balance between daring and prudence is one that is brave enough to recognize the value that lies beyond barriers of comfort, and wise enough to understand that haste does not guarantee advantage. In other words, those afraid of risks lack courage, but those too swift to act lack purpose. It is in the best interest of man to exercise powers of the mind, in order that actions do not lead to negative consequences, and if they do, to accept what is just for one's endeavours. Those who have thought clearly and precisely about their intention puts themselves on stable footings for success. It is never the wise man who takes risks for pleasure, for this is surely driven by his ego, but instead, risks that have a probability of yielding benefit are always worthy of undertaking. Even if they are unsuccessful, one furthers their learning about the human capacity. Mistakes are rarely everlasting unless they have physical consequences, whereas those that teach mental lessons offer a repository of faults to learn from. Pain is never evil when perceived by the laws of nature that govern what is fair for unreasonable action, and those who have fortitude of mind can learn to combat pain and guide it to work for them. Where the soul is contested, victory lies in the hands of the ones who seek acceptance. A man that is ready to act has courage. A man who is not is lacking, but no one is free from the burden of fear. It is the sign of a courageous person who is able to conquer fear, so that their readiness is better prepared to act, as it were better already to conquer themselves. Courage is also closely connected to wisdom. The Stoics believed that wisdom is the ability to see things clearly. As Aristotle said, courage is the first of human qualities, because it is the only quality that guarantees the others. Think about that for a second. Courage guarantees an action will be made, irrespective of whatever that action might be. If it's accompanied by foolishness, then God knows what might happen. If it's accompanied by intellect, prudence, wisdom, then you have something worthwhile. Those who leave themselves vulnerable to attacks are worthy candidates of higher virtue. There is nothing more beautiful than to watch a person struggle through adversity, unmoved by the misfortunes that are destined to fall their way, but instead welcomes them with open arms and full understanding that failure is written in the laws of nature. Any person who prefers to walk the path of least resistance by nothing other than the absence of courage will find themselves weaker than those who fail with the cheerfulness washed over their faces and fortitude of mind. Fear does not discriminate between men and women, and instead, they write their own stories of how they dance with fear. The person who is willing to grow themselves has accepted what is just as necessary by the principles that govern nature. But how do we cultivate courage? It's not something that we can just will ourselves to have. Some people are born with it, one would argue. Or is it like an axe that needs sharpening? Like all virtues, in my opinion, courage requires practice and discipline. And here are a few tips for cultivating courage in your life. Identify your fears. The first step to overcoming our fears is to identify them. What are you afraid of? Is it public speaking, failure, rejection, or something else? Once you know what your fears are, you can start to work on overcoming them. Take small steps. Courage is not about making big, bold moves all the time. It's about taking small steps towards your goals, even if they scare you a little bit. It can mean bold moves. If anything, those are the highest forms of courage. Sacrifice, circumstances in time which require vulnerability. That is why vulnerability is a form of courage, because you're taking on risk, you're taking on opposition, adversity, challenge. The human condition is always in a vulnerable state. So courage embodies that. Big, bold moves, they do fall under courage and they do require courage. But when we are sharpening that axe, small steps are just as important as big steps. Practice resilience. Courage requires resilience. This is why something like depression or something like anxiety can almost be like a foundation for rising from the ashes like a phoenix, to sound so cliche. But you get the picture. It's a foundation by which you can stem from. It gives you your lowest low of which you can rise out of. And courage comes when you most need it. Surround yourself with courageous people who inspire you to be courageous. Seek out role models and mentors who embody the virtue of courage and learn from them. And don't be afraid to ask for help and support when you need it. So to conclude all of this, courage is a vital virtue for living a virtuous and fulfilling life. It allows us to act in accordance with our values, face our fears, and pursue our dreams with determination and resilience. So I challenge you to cultivate courage in your daily life and to live a life that is brave, wise, and meaningful. Thank you for watching, and may courage be your guide on your journey to virtue and wisdom. Welcome to the Sage Verse, with real works and true words. Patterns of recognition leaves your brain converged. Time is irrelevant when the thoughts of impediment corrupt your soul with mind-numbing nemesis. The sage's way is where the truth hits the page. Turn your soul into a library in the name of knowledge and discovery. We seek out reality to be gone of human apathy.